Navajo Nation, the largest indigenous tribe in the United States, spanning portions of Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah. Their history is one of resilience, shaped by centuries of interaction with European colonizers, forced relocation, and ongoing efforts to protect their land, culture, and ways of life. Dry climates classify the Utah Navajo Nation. The climate subtype is a cold semi-arid climate or a cold desert climate, depending on factors such as precipitation and temperature. While these nations are already relatively dry, increased greenhouse gas concentrations can exaggerate drought conditions by altering precipitation patterns and increasing evaporation rates. Higher temperatures associated with the greenhouse gas effect can lead to more frequent and intense heat waves, further drying out the environment, particularly in already dry regions like the desert climates found in Utah and Navajo. This could impact water availability, agriculture, and wildlife habitats. The discovery of nuclear fission in the late 1930s and the potential of a weapon based on that discovery motivated a group of scientists to call the US government to stockpile uranium ore in pursuit of research for fission bombs. During the height of the uranium boom between 1940 and 1980, the US began to mine uranium ore within the Navajo Reserve, driven by economic incentives thanks to the skyrocketing demand of uranium. Over 500 mines were constructed within and around the Navajo Reserve, including the Grand Canyon. From 1944 to 1986, nearly 30 million tons of uranium ore were extracted from the Navajo lands under leases from the Navajo Nation. Many Navajo people work the mines, often living and raising families near the mines and mills. Nuclear waste disposal is a complex, expensive, and time-consuming procedure as the waste needs to be stored for thousands of years. Because of economic pressures, regulations, and oversight resulted in poor waste management practices. Radioactive materials and heavy metals such as arsenic, mercury, and lead leached into the environment, contaminating groundwater, soil, and food sources. Exposure to these toxic substances can lead to heavy metal poisoning, which can cause neurological disorders, kidney damage, and cardiovascular diseases, and numerous cancers that affect reproductive health, fertility among community members, leading to miscarriages, stillbirths, and birth defects. Contamination of water sources makes them undrinkable due to their increased risk of waterborne diseases.
Water is really sacred to us. It's life. Here in White Mesa, that's one thing we lack is water, but it's that important that we need to educate people that contamination is not good for life. Mother Earth supports us with life, and life is water. What our elders said from day one, you protect this land. Protect the water because it's going to protect you.
Today, water sources, homes, and over 500 mines experience elevated levels of gamma radiation. Children, pregnant women, and elderly are at greater risk of adverse health effects and exposure to environmental pollutions associated with uranium mining. Joseph Wagner, a health expert who collected data regarding the health effects of uranium since 1960 from the U.S. Public Health Service, reported that from 1960 to 1974 there were 144 cancer deaths, along with 3,500 miners, 700 to 800 of whom were Navajo. Rural communities like the White Mesa community and Navajo Nation living in proximity with the uranium mining sites experience disproportionate environmental impacts due to their isolation, limited infrastructure, and weak political power. They did not see their people represented in legislative bodies until the late 20th and early 21st century. These communities have fewer resources available for the environmental monitoring and remediation efforts. Lack of information and resources further marginalize these communities, exacerbating the impacts of pollution and their health and well-being. Additionally, these communities are dependent on natural resources for fishing, hunting, and drinking. Navajo Nation is a hunter-gatherer community. All of their food risks contamination, creating a profound socio-economic and cultural impact because of the disruptions of traditional practices and cultural activities due to the environmental contamination of uranium mining. Various stakeholders are involved, including affected communities like residents of the Navajo Nation and nearby areas, government agencies, and federal, state, and tribal levels. The government had created regulations related to the environmental protection and mining operations, including Clean Water Act of 1972 and the Safe Drinking Water Act of 1974. These laws set standards for the water quality and regulate discharges from mining activities. Government agencies such as the Environmental Protection Agency were responsible for enforcing these laws and regulations, conducting inspections, and monitoring water quality. Government agencies such as the U.S. Department of Energy have initiated cleanup efforts to address the legacy of pollution from 200 now abandoned uranium mines, including remediation projects for water treatment facilities. Other stakeholders include uranium mining companies such as Energy Fuels Inc. that have implemented environmentally responsible practices such as employing water management strategies and minimizing pollution through the improved mining techniques. Thanks to the National Environmental Policy Act of 1969, a U.S. environmental law that established a broad national framework for protecting the environment, mining companies must comply with environmental regulations and obtain permits for operations according to Section 102(2)(c), which requires federal agencies to prepare environmental impact statements for major federal actions significantly affecting the quality of human environments. However, there have been instances of non-compliance where companies are held responsible with legal actions, community pressure, financial consequences, and permit sanctions. Navajo Nation, while part of the United States, is essentially an independent nation, which makes imposing federal law complex.
As a father to two young boys, it's really bad to have them play outside, especially with their uranium just right up the road.
Since back in the 80s, my late uncle has been fighting against uranium mills. In the 90s, he had passed, and we decided that we needed to step up to continue on his fight until we closed the mill.
The affected communities engage with the issues through various means, including protests and legal actions. However, in the past, language barriers and racism have contributed to them being ignored. Additionally, the past policies and practices such as forced relocation, resource extraction, and uranium mining without adequate safeguards have disproportionately harmed indigenous communities and eroded trust in government institutions. The Indigenous Environmental Network advocates for indigenous rights and sovereignty and works to amplify indigenous voices in environmental decision-making processes. Environmental and political activist organizations such as the New Mexico Political Report, Indigenous Environmental Network, and Grand Canyon Trust advocate for the rights of affected communities and raise awareness about the environmental and health impacts of uranium mining.
Reduction measures, Toya said, if government policies and laws are the problem, they should not be afraid to say it.
At the request of the U.S. House Committee, along with the BIA and the NRC, the DOE, and the IHS, developed a coordinated plan to address uranium contamination in Navajo over the 10-year period, which is currently still in effect. This initiative provides targeted resources, technical assistance, and coordinated federal action. It aims to improve access to clean water and healthcare services, support economic development, and empower indigenous communities into decision-making processes. By prioritizing community and initiative, seeks to ensure that local voices are heard and respected. Additionally, the Environmental Protection Agency has partnered with Navajo Nation through the Superfund program. Over $1.7 billion in enforcement agreements have been made to reduce radiation exposure risks from 230 of the 523 abandoned uranium mines. The 10-year plan is grounded in scientific evidence demonstrating the environmental impacts of uranium contamination. Numerous studies have documented elevated levels of uranium in the soil, water, and air, as well as the associated health risk among residents. Scientific evidence also supports the effectiveness of remediation techniques such as soil and water cleanup and containment, and long-term monitoring of reducing exposure to hazardous contaminants and protecting human health and the environment. The present status of this environmental injustice issue is one of ongoing concern and urgency. Despite the mining activities, the legacy of uranium contamination continues to pose significant environmental and public health risks to the community. Elevated levels of uranium persist in the soil, water, and air, as noted by the federal reports, leading to exposure associated with health impacts among residents and higher than national averages that has been confirmed. The IPCC's Fifth Amendment reports provides extensive evidence confirming human activities as the primary driver for global warming and climate change. This includes rising greenhouse gas concentrations, warming of global temperatures, altered precipitation patterns, melting of ice caps and glaciers, and rising sea levels, all pointing towards impacts and activities like burning fossil fuels and deforestation. To improve our consumer paradigm, we must move towards a more sustainable and resilient climate future in uranium mining. We can adopt the seventh generation principle by prioritizing long-term impacts of the environment and future generation. This involves implementing sustainable mining practices that consider environmental protection, community well-being, and the indigenous rights. Integrating two-eyed thinking, which combines indigenous knowledge with Western science, is crucial for creatively addressing environmental issues associated with uranium mining. By incorporating traditional indigenous practices with scientific expertise, we can develop holistic solutions that consider ecological, cultural, and socioeconomic factors by ultimately preventing future environmental injustices and promoting responsible resource extraction. We must recognize the importance by prioritizing community engagement, strengthening regulatory oversight, promoting environmental justice principles, and supporting sustainable development to address environmental justice issues efficiently. By listening to the community concerns, enforcing strict regulations, incorporating equality into policy making, and embracing sustainable practices, we can build a more just and resilient future for all.